I've got to say, this arrow is some of the coolest branding ever, isn't it? So it looks like the guys over at Vaer Watches have had a bit of a refresh with the packaging and made my life a bit easier in the process. Now it says exactly what each of these are on the surface. And these are some watches I've been very keen to try for a long time now, because I've always thought that Vaer's entry-level stuff, their quartz stuff, aesthetically always looked pretty good. So up until now, I've only ever really tried some of the more premium dive style models, whereas these are significantly less money. And we've also got different sizes. And thanks to Vaer for agreeing to send these in at my request as well. As far as I know, I'm free to do and say what I want with these. You'll find both of these, by the way, affiliate linked in the video description if you want to check any of them out for yourself. Yeah, I'd be very surprised if that didn't fit me. So these are their DS2 quartz divers. And this blue one is the 39mm version, while the other one, the black one, is the 36mm. But they do also make several in 42mm as well. And while the colour selection for the 36 is pretty limited, you at least can choose the size that would fit your wrist, which I always appreciate. And without a doubt, one of these is going to fit me. It's just a question of which. Because that's always been a slight problem for my tiny arm. Most dive watches inherently are fairly large, just due to them having, you know, that bezel design and that. Often tend to be quite thick and a little bit cumbersome, whereas I'm sure that at least one of these will fit. Now, as you can see, they are quite substantially different in size, and there's only a 3mm width difference apparently, but we'll get the calipers out in a moment. But yeah, in the hands, maybe even more so than on camera, there does seem to be quite the gulf in size. Now, out of these two colours here, definitely prefer the navy without a shadow of a doubt. Just has a bit more pizzazz to the background there. I think that just makes it look higher quality, whereas as you can see, the black one is fairly plain, but we'll get close up in a second. Here's a look at the side profile of both of these, and I do think these cases are definitely something that Vaer offers that doesn't really show up on the spec sheet. You know, it might just say stainless steel case like loads of the other affordable divers, or ones that are cheaper than this. This has always been a pretty elegant case shape they use here. A little bit Omega-like there, as you can see, with those twisting lugs. Polishing is excellent on these. These have both also got sapphire crystals on, and the blue one especially is very clear. Not quite so much with this smaller black one. Don't know whether that's just down to the colour or what, but for whatever reason, this one just seems that little bit more murky. Now, it's not a perfect setup in here. I've had a delay on the product I'm trying to get to sort that problem out, and in this new studio, the ceiling just gets reflected. But even then, you can see there is quite a bit of a difference. This one on the right does seem clearer to me, and that one is certainly better than the vast majority of the mainstream crystals that you tend to come across, unlike your Orients, your Citizens definitely as well. Let's test these bezels though. This is always one of those smaller details as well that you can't see on a spec sheet. Now that definitely isn't as nice feeling as the higher end Vaer stuff. Those watches have much more crisper, more defined clicks. This 36mm has that kind of raspiness. It is actually probably a tiny bit better actually than the likes of your Orients and your Seikos. But in general is in a very similar ballpark, whereas some previous Vaer watches have been considerably ahead of that. Let's just try the bigger one out of curiosity to see if it's different, because sometimes the bigger ones are better. And yes, yeah, the big one is definitely better. So I'm not sure exactly why that is. I'm assuming something to do with the size change. Just makes it easier to get a crisper finish on the big one. I don't know. But this 39mm, you can even hear the difference. Much more defined clicks, less crunchiness, and maybe a little bit less backplay as well. Yeah, that's a really good bezel for a affordable dive watch. Now, these are both aluminium inserts here, but they've done a pretty good job of matching them up colour-wise, as well as stylistically. And that's something I also mentioned recently in my newsletter about Vaer watches. These affordable ones, I think they're quite tempting. They really do share that same design DNA as a lot of the more expensive stuff in their range. They do look very, very similar. And they're still pretty durable. Like I said, they've got those crystals, but they've also got decent water resistance. This one is 150 meters, so not a figure you see all too often, but plenty enough for 99% of people. And you'll be able to go swimming in these no problem. Has even a quite a cool case back effect there. A little bit trippy. But yeah, they've got that screwed case back. Also got a screw down crown on both of these as well, which is really nice and clean actually. Very, very silky. That's also one of these other differences because on a fair few of the even really good Chinese watches, a lot of those dive watches have got really gristly feeling crowns, which just doesn't give you confidence. I know that one's really good. Let's just check this other one though. Surely this is, yeah, this has also got one as well, and exactly the same story there too. Obviously these are quartz divers, so that probably makes things a little bit easier. I tend to find that quartz watches, probably because the crown's interacting with the movement less to some degree, tend to be a bit cleaner. Both of these crystals are flat, by the way. Now, what movement are each of these watches using? The 36mm model, we've got the Miyota GM12, likely the same again. Yep, exactly the same again. Now, the vast majority of brands seem to really struggle at alignment on quartz watches. Now, at least one of the two here is bob-on aligned. Let's try this smaller one. Any luck with this one? And yeah, that one is exactly aligned too, but I wouldn't exactly expect that. The only brand that I know that's super consistent with quartz alignment is Casio, because apparently they're able to use machines somehow, like some special alignment machine basically, to attach the hands for them, which is one of the trickiest parts for humans to do. So yeah, out of this pair, I do think that this black one is definitely the least visually impressive. They do also make this in a silver as well, which in hindsight, I'd probably go for instead. Now, I went for this one just because it's the more sensible, safe choice. But yeah, the other ones seem to have a more prominent sunburst, and yeah, I think I'd probably prefer that. I do have applied markers on both of these, as you can see, with that bordered date wheel as well. And plenty of luminescence. We'll have to see how these ones stack up in that regard. Quite thin, both of these as well, as you'd hope for a quartz watch. This one uses a fairly small 18mm band here too. Straps on their watches tend to be pretty good quality, at least these silicone ones. The bracelets are good too. These nylon bands that you also get in the box here, these are much more middle of the road. Can get a little bit scratchy, and also just with them being so square, I don't think they really suit the contours of these watches particularly well. You know, these watches have always had some nice curvaceousness to them, and that's just not replicated with those beige coloured straps that you get, sadly. Maybe it'll look better when it's on though, but here's a closer look at the blue one, by the way. And I definitely think this is one of the best looking affordable dive watches you can get. And on that note, we're talking about prices. Oh, that's peculiar, because this one's actually the cheaper of the two here. So prices on this one start at about $239, or about £170, whereas it's basically a tenner more for the smaller one. I'm assuming because it's a little bit more difficult to pack everything into a smaller space. But as an end user, I mean, I definitely prefer the 39mm from a visual standpoint. And for once, I also prefer the proportionality of it as well. Typically, smaller watches tend to have better proportions visually, you know, like the bezel to dial ratio. But I think the combo is more pleasing on this 39mm. And given that the rest of the specs are identical, I think you're kind of getting a better watch for less money if you can fit into it. Now let's have a look at the 36mm, and the overall size does remind me a little bit of the Casio MDV10. You know, that smaller Duro that Casio released that was a bit of a fail. And I wanted to add here that kind of on that front, I've just been quite frustrated by Casio this last couple of years, because I feel they had a real opportunity to come up with a good sequel to the Duro, you know, that wasn't 44mm in size, and then they just threw out that half-hearted, rubbishy version, and all the while the Duro's prices have been creeping slowly up. Now, the prices aren't quite so bad in territories like the US, but here in the UK, it's gradually approaching 100 quid, so I've definitely got my eyes out for more challenges at the moment, which is one of the reasons I wanted to take a look at these. I looked at ratio watches recently, because some of these micro brands are really catching up, and in some departments overtaking Casio, especially in visuals. This one does list 36, and well, it is basically exactly 36. Lug to lug is roughly 42.5, which is very short, and slimness is about 10.2, which isn't bad for a diver. And unless they sacrificed a lot of the curviness that kind of makes these watches what they are, I guess they couldn't have made it all that much slimmer. Maybe they'd have to come up with a separate case design with slightly different proportions. And like I said, the lug width on this should be 18mm, yes. Oh, and the bezel size, by the way, is at the outside 35.8, whereas the 39mm watch, that is exactly 39.00. Lug to lug is a hair under 46, while the thickness is quite similar to the other one, about 10.4, but because that lug to lug's a bit longer, I think it actually looks proportionally thinner. Lug width on this one, by the way, is 20mm. You might have a few more strap options. That's probably the most common size, while the bezel width is 39mm. And it's funny because I've just moved this watch away to whack it on my wrist, and it turns out it does actually have a sunburst, this black one. You just can't quite tell under this particular light. Another reason I'm trying to change it. But yeah, it almost has like a slight brown tinge to it, surprisingly, despite it being listed as black. I do think that the crystal on this one seems hazier, or the black can't deal quite as well with that kind of blue anti-reflective coating that you've got going on here. Either way, it does seem like a pretty good quality watch, and while the dial and bezel are roughly the kind of size that would be perfect for me, I think maybe the lug to lug is actually a hair short. First time I think I've ever said that. I think I'm kind of at that cut-off point, really. I think this is probably best for those with a 6¼ inch wrist like mine or under. Always get a really good on-wrist fit with these watches from side on, as you can see. Absolutely no excess space under there. So this watch won't be wibbling and wobbling about. And I think I might have to just give this a test over the course of a couple of weeks just to see if I do think it's too small or if I think I can get away with it. We'll give these a low light test in a moment and maybe a crystal check too, just for the fun of it. Now, in recent weeks, I've been trying to do many more pull-ups, and I've noticed that my wrist size seems to be fractionally increasing with that. So maybe I'll have to start looking at some fractionally larger watches at some point. I found myself having to put links back in for the first time. Well, the first time since I gained some pandemic weight. Strap, by the way, is really good when it comes to the number of adjustment holes. You've still actually got one more that you could go down to. But the only thing I will say is, you know, for a watch this small, which might actually appeal to smaller wrists than mine, you have an awful lot of adjustment holes that go significantly larger than my wrist, which seems a little bit counterintuitive. You do have this really good little slot here at the end, though. So if you pop this into the final keeper, the keeper's got this like square protrusion that can effectively lock that in place there, so it won't be going anywhere. But let's try this blue one, because I definitely like the colour of that one a lot. And yeah, I think that looks fantastic. If it wasn't for that once per second tick, you'd probably think that this was a significantly more expensive watch. Something about it reminds me of Baltic or something. Maybe it's this particular tone of blue they've gone for here. What do they call this one? They just call this navy. It's almost like a mid-wash denim blue. But yeah, I suspect very, very versatile. As for sizing, maybe just about prefer the size of this one on my wrist. So I think the absolute perfect option would be like a 37.5 if there was one. Doubt we'll ever quite see one of those. Also like how on these watches you do have that symmetrical date wheel at the bottom center. Now admittedly the movement here is maybe a little bit small for the dial on this watch. As you can see, it's raised a little bit, but either way I'd probably still take that over the typical one gaping open at 3. And it's some of these little touches that are the reason that you have watches like this that cost more than the likes of Casio Duro, for example. All these little things kind of add up in the grand scheme of things, but it does leave you with a better looking watch, I would say, by some margin, and one that many more people will actually fit into. Really love the sides of these watches, some great polishing on them, and pretty thin on wrist, as you can see. Always like it when brands actually, you know, make use of having smaller quartz movements. Now this 39mm model, they make this one in quite a few other colours, so not just your black and silver for now. They've previously released this in pretty much the full rainbow, and it does feel very, very sturdy. I thought I'd give you a quick look at each of these on the optional bracelets as well, and I have to say with this 36mm model in particular, I do think this looks quite substantially better on the bracelet. Don't know what it is. I think it makes the watch look a tiny bit bigger, making it seem like it's got that little bit more presence I was after. This one has female end links. As for quality, you get solid steel links throughout. These are also screw links too, and while I've had to take out almost all of them, these are actually pretty easy to change. So you just use the included screwdriver here, remove as many links as you want, and then screw it back together. They've also got a pretty good number of adjustment holes. You've got 4 there to pick from. Sadly, no on-the-fly micro adjusts here, which you do get with some of the Chinese brands, which is good. So you would need a sharp tool there to adjust it. The milled clasp, though, is very nice at this price and rarely seen. This one has the double fold-over mechanism as well there for extra security. And this is your more typical kind of oyster-style bracelet instead. And I do prefer the other one, to be honest. This one does have those male end links, so it will make the watch wear a little bit longer this way. But it's more the visual difference. This one is a little bit less expensive than the other one, but it's got quite a plain finish all the way down, which I don't think goes quite as well with the polishing on the case as the other one. But for the rest of it, it's pretty much the same story. Overall, I'd say these bracelets are certainly good and and maybe worth considering, but they're not as great as some of the extreme stuff we've seen on the likes of San Martin watches. So if you were considering a bracelet, I'd probably go for the Jubilee style one. And I think they've also got a solar diver, at least they used to, which has quite similar looks to this, but that bit of added practicality. And while we're on that theme, let's give these crystals a quick check, as well as that luminescence, because previous Vaer watches have had pretty good lume too. So if these really are sapphire crystals, when I touch them with my pen, you should see the needle fly up to the section where it says ruby and sapphire. So let's see if they're telling the truth. We'll go with the 36mm first. And yep, straight into that sapphire section, and right at the top this time too. And exactly the same, maybe a hair lower, but yeah, still comfortably in the sapphire box, meaning you'll get some really good scratch resistance on each of these. And it also looks like they've got different luminescence, doesn't it? So on the site, the 39mm model also says it's got, yeah, BGW9 superluminova, while the 36mm just has the more standard C3. So in theory, should be worse, although it looks kind of brighter here at initial impressions. Let's test it with my UV torch. So I'll cut now to 20 seconds later. And yeah, substantially different colour, but to be frank here, the C3 stuff is still lasting really well. In fact, these are some of the best lumed watches I've had in over the last 6 months, and comfortably better than some of the big brand divers I was just looking at on the main channel. I mean, it's only when you put those on screen that you'll see how much brighter these are in comparison, even the C3 one. So yeah, well, again, I mean, that actually looked like a downgrade on paper, you know, going from BGW9 to C3, but I mean, the application here is still definitely passable. If anything, really good. That might be the best C3 I've seen. So yeah, that's a quick look at the DS2 dive watches from Vaer Watches, as well as their new 36mm version. If you're after something that feels substantial, doesn't cost a lot, and looks quite stylish, they're pretty good choices. Though out of the two of them, I'd definitely be leaning more towards the 39mm if it'll fit your wrist. I think that bezel, the slight difference in the crystal, and having those dials with a bit more pop to them do push it over the edge. And it's a hair cheaper too. But yeah, they're both linked in the description if you do want to check them out. And cheers to Vaer for sending both of these in.